Was David Lammy right to give more funding to UNRWA, which is a human rights charity, I suppose, that has got links to Hamas? It's time now for the head-to-head. Right, so, despite the aid agency's controversial links to Hamas, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, today announced that the government will restore funding to the UN's Palestine Relief Agency, UNRWA.
I was appalled by the allegations that UNRWA staff were involved in the 7th October attacks. We are reassured that after Catherine Colonna's independent review, UNRWA is ensuring they meet the highest standards of neutrality and strengthening its procedures, including on vetting. UNRWA is absolutely central to these efforts. No other agency can deliver aid at the scale needed.
So the previous government suspended funding to the organisation in January after allegations emerged that 12 UNRWA staff were actually involved in the October 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas. But after an independent review found a lack of evidence for these claims, Lammy has pledged to give the aid agency 21 million quid. OK, well, that all sounds great, doesn't it? Apparently they're going to be running schools, nurseries and hospitals. Lammy's decision marks a split between UK and US foreign policy, so the Americans aren't doing this. So tonight I'm asking, was David Lammy right to give more funding to UNRWA in Gaza? Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your-say at GBNews is where you will find that Twitter poll. But first, going head-to-head on this now are the director of the Sanctuary Foundation, Dr. Krish Kandiah, and former spokesperson for the Israeli government, Eylon Levy. Thank you very much. Great to have you both on. Eylon, I will start with you. I mean, look, I suppose this independent review now has absolved UNRWA of any links, has it, to Hamas, and so we can crack on and give them money.
No, the independent review didn't do that, and in fact, that's not the question that it looked at. There's been a strange split-screen moment in the last few weeks. Every day, the IDF has been reporting more counter-terror operations that it has been conducting against Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists hiding inside UNRWA buildings, inside UNRWA schools, inside UNRWA facilities, while the international leadership has said absolutely nothing. UNRWA is an integral part of Hamas's military machine on the ground in Gaza. I wish this weren't the case, that a UN agency on the ground was so complicit with a terror organization, but that is the reality. UNRWA is a Hamas front. And I think that hardworking British families need to realize that when the British government is taking their money and giving it to UNRWA, they are making a direct subsidy to the Hamas army of terror by giving it to the organization that hired terrorists who took part in the October 7th massacre, has been covering up how Hamas is hijacking aid, and most egregiously allows Hamas terrorists to operate out of their schools with impunity, thus giving cover to the barbaric terror organization that perpetrated those horrific attacks on October 7th.
All right, I'll come back to you. Dr. Krish, yeah, I mean, that's quite a compelling case, isn't it, from Eylon there, not to give money to this lot? I mean, well, I was going to say we don't give money to the Taliban, but we do, actually, so I suppose there is precedent.
Well, there are 30,000 people that work for UNRWA. Only 66 were under investigation, and none of those were approved. So that's less than 0.2% of the UNRWA workforce. It will be like saying we're going to ban the Republican Party because the shooter that tried to take out Donald Trump was a paid-up Republican. Look, there are no other schools, right? There's no other infrastructure. There's no other body that's able to provide the kind of support that's needed in Gaza. The events of the 7th of October were absolutely appalling. We do need to go after the terrorists and we need to get the hostages back, but we cannot allow collective punishment for civilians in Gaza. Lancet, the world's leading medical journal, predicts that unless we do something very radical, 186,000 people are likely to die in this conflict. And we can't let innocents be killed.
OK, and Eylon, I suppose... Yeah, go on.
No, I mean, I just want to challenge that. The Lancet did not say that. The Lancet published a letter that speculated on the basis of 4 indirect casualties for every 1 casualty. If you take the disputed Hamas casualty figure that even the AP has said is unreliable and multiply it by 5 for no specific reason, you would reach that outrageous number. But going back to what your previous guest said, it is important that aid reach people in Gaza while making sure that Hamas cannot steal it. Unfortunately, since the beginning of this war, UNRWA has been covering up how Hamas has been stealing aid. Right at the beginning of the war, even deleting a tweet in which they admitted that Hamas had stolen fuel from their facilities. At any given moment, there are about 1,000 trucks worth of aid sitting inside Gaza, on the Gazan side of the crossing, rotting in the sun because the UN is not coming to collect it, even though Israel is letting all that aid into Gaza. That is why the Israeli army has spent the last few months working together with the private sector in Gaza to make sure that aid can get to the people who need it without having to go through the organization that is allowing Hamas terrorists to operate out of their schools, meaning that your taxpayer money, Patrick, that is going to UNRWA is going to build the facilities that Hamas is using as military compounds.
Well, that's the point, Chris, that I will come to you on now, because I'm just going to rattle off a few headlines. Right? So this is from a week ago in the Telegraph. UNRWA has 100 employees who are members of Hamas. That is an Israeli government claim. The IDF has found Hamas drones, explosives, etc. in an UNRWA HQ. There's more. I mean, there's loads of this, actually, to be honest with you. Apparently, Hamas skimmed $1 billion in UN aid for weapons and tunnels. That was supposed to be going to UNRWA as well. I mean, why do you think it's a good idea for our government, our new government, to be giving money to these people?
Patrick, there's been an independent report. Norway and the EU are convinced, and so is our government, that this is the best way to get aid into the country. Look, Eylon and I agree on something. There does need to be a way that aid gets in to Gaza. If we can come up with a more effective way, I'll back it, but I can't see a more effective way than the 30,000 UNRWA staff that are available, that are Palestinian already, they're local people, helping fellow local people, and they're tracking down those that had any links with Hamas.
OK, go on, Eylon, come back to that. What would be the more effective way? If getting aid into Gaza really is the priority here, then what is the other way that we can do it without giving money to these people?
There are many conflicts around the world and many UN agencies that have experience in disaster relief. UNRWA is not one of them. And that's because it's not an aid distribution agency. Before October 7th, it was an organization that provided welfare and health services to the Palestinian people inside Gaza because they were controlled by Hamas, and Hamas took the position that said, we don't want to have to care for these people's needs. We're taking our money and investing it in the tunnels underneath hospitals instead of building hospitals. Its job was to run schools and hospitals. It's not an aid distribution agency. And that's why it's doing such a bad job distributing aid, and at any given point, 1,000 trucks rotting in the sun, and why Israel is having to work with the Gazan private sector to get aid to the people who need it. All the way, it's been allowing Hamas to operate out of its facilities. Just last week, you mentioned correctly, Israeli soldiers found a drone with a wingspan wider than my arms inside a UN compound, while its leaders are going around the world begging for more money for generations of refugees. There's no other country in the world where there are generations of refugees. You just had this discussion now on your show about the boats coming to England. If someone is a refugee and they get citizenship in the UK, they're not considered a refugee anymore. Only the Palestinian agency UNRWA keeps a different definition of refugee, so they can continue this Ponzi scheme of milking money from the British taxpayer in perpetuity to build facilities military compounds.
I'll let Chris come back to that and then we'll wrap.
He's an 80% of the population of Gaza are refugees because they were moved there in 1948 and they weren't allowed to leave.
Under a different definition than the UN Refugee Agency.
All right, let's
under a definition that gives them refugee status in perpetuity.
All right, Chris, come on.
So look, I just want to find the common ground here with Eylon. If there is a more effective way of getting aid in at the scale that's needed, so many aid workers have been killed, either by terribly aimed missiles or deliberate targeting. That there is no other aid agency of scale that UNRWA can provide, and it seems to be the most effective way.
All right, both of you, thank you very much. OK, I'll chat to you both again soon. Look, who do you agree with? Was David Lammy right to restore government funding to the UN's aid agency in Gaza, UNRWA? Alison says he needs to be sacked. So I'll take that as a no, Alison, from you. Todd on X says, it's just the latest in a long line of examples of why David Lammy shouldn't be Foreign Secretary. I think, by the way, this is a massive concern. It is a massive concern. Because if we know that UNRWA is linked to Hamas, right, and we are choosing to give them money, then we are deliberately, as a government now, giving Hamas money. Obviously, everyone involved with that would probably deny it, but Mo on X says the links to Hamas was Israel's propaganda and no conclusive evidence has been provided. Right, your verdict is in. 4% of you think that David Lammy was right to give more money to UNRWA. 96% of you, easy for me to say he wasn't.